A good day and welcome to Baobab Chats. We are so excited today. It's a great day. We have been running, some awareness on COVID-19, and through the awareness that we did, we started, with some videos within the team, and then we spoke to Dr. Rasala Navo, a South African doctor based in Limpopo, South Africa, and she unpacked COVID-19 for us. After that, we went on and we spoke to Dr. Grant Murewanhema, a medical doctor based in Zimbabwe. And after that, there were still questions that were coming. And a number of people asked and requested to say, can't we have these question and answer sessions live? Because we really would love to know more. And we want to ask and hear from the horse's mouth. We are joined today by Dr. Grant Murewanhema. Doc, welcome to Baobab Chats.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being on your show, and I look forward to an exciting question and answer segment.
Great. So just a disclaimer. Doc has said no holds barred. He is prepared to answer any medical related questions with regard to COVID-19. So the focus is COVID-19. We are in a time of a pandemic. This is what is happening right now. This is what is happening in our backyard. So please fire on, bring on your questions. You can send your questions through Facebook, through YouTube, through Twitter. We will see the questions here and we'll flight the questions that you put here underneath at the bottom of our banners. And Doc will respond to those questions and I will be interacting from here and there. We'll try to avoid a repeat of answering questions that have been asked over and over again to make sure that we can go through as many questions as possible so that this time that we have, we'll spend it in as more fruitful way as possible. Doc, we always want to start by a recap. You know that by now. What is COVID-19? Can you help us with a recap? So what is COVID-19? Can you give us a recap, Doc?
All right, thank you. So let's start again. COVID-19 is a disease. It's a viral infection caused by a virus that is known as the severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2. Coronavirus 2, why? Because there have been other coronaviruses that have been in existence for a long time and that also cause acute respiratory infections. What comes to mind for most people is the previous SARS, which stood for the severe acute respiratory syndrome, which still occurs in outbreaks from time to time, and then the Middle East respiratory syndrome, or MERS, which occurred around 2010. So one can see that outbreaks of coronaviruses have occurred from time to time, but this one, that's called the severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, causing COVID-19, is a novel coronavirus. Novel is a word that stands for something new or something that's recently discovered. So it was discovered in 2019 after a cluster of cases of pneumonia, which was a bit unusual, were noted in a Chinese province that's called Wuhan. Okay, up to now, people are still questioning the origins of this respiratory virus, but what we know from what we have so far is this started as a zoonotic infection. Zoonotic meaning that it's something that people obtain from interacting or from eating, wild animals, birds, and so on and so on. So this COVID-19 is thought to have started as a zoonotic infection in Wuhan, and then because of increased travel, globalization, it eventually spread to other parts of the world, starting in Asia, America, Europe, and then the rest of the world. And it's one unique viral infection because it has caused a true global pandemic in the sense that no country in the world has been spared. So all countries have reported cases at some point in time. So COVID-19 itself, the disease, it's a disease that initially for most people presents like a flu, with flu symptoms, cough, hot body, which we refer to as a fever, generalized body weakness, and then it can then differ in severity. For some people, it will become a pneumonia or a pneumonitis. These are the people who will develop respiratory or breathing problems. For some people, it will cause other kinds of problems, but primarily, yes, it is a respiratory tract infection causing an acute respiratory infection.
All right, Doc, the first question comes in and says, this virus favors cold conditions. Are we going to see the end of this virus? Now, this question, I'll then link it to another question that a number of people have asked, Doc, of saying, this virus, we were told at the beginning that, it dies in the sun and things like that. We are now in summer. We are in a second wave. It's even worse. So can you tackle these together, Doc?
Thank you. I think there are many questions in those two questions, and it would be fair to actually break them down.
Yeah.
I think whether we're gonna see an end to COVID-19 or not, that's probably got nothing to do with the seasons, to do with whether we'll be in winter, in summer, and so on and so on. This virus will continue to thrive for as long as people provide chains of transmission from one human being to another human being. So effectively, that means the best way of dealing with this virus is if we can break the chains of transmission. This is why, at some point, people have yet to impose lockdowns. People have yet to impose international travel restrictions. Schools and colleges have yet to be closed, and so on and so on. This is just trying to break the chains of transmission. This is why we do contact tracing and isolate confirmed cases, quarantine people who we think have been exposed to the virus. When we do this successfully and break these chains of transmission, we can actually see an end to the coronavirus. Like what I said, this is not a new thing. If you go to 1918, if you go to 1919, we had Spanish flu. And at some point in time, people were actually able to control it because of these public health interventions that break the chains of transmission. And if you look at the SARS and MERS epidemics that we have had before, we've also been able to break their chains of transmission. Yes, viral infections tend to thrive in winter or in the cold, but that doesn't mean that they cannot also thrive in summer. They also tend to thrive in wet conditions, and as you notice currently in Zimbabwe, we are experiencing lots of rainfall, and we're generally in wet weather conditions. So this is another condition for thriving for these coronaviruses. So yes, they will continue to thrive, but we will see an end to them if the public health interventions that we have instituted are properly followed and they are successful. One of the reasons why we think this will also come to an end is naturally viruses tend to become weaker over time with mutations. So a mutation is when the structure of the virus actually changes. And these viruses do this frequently from time to time. This is why we continue to hear of new strains, and new variants. When it mutates, it can become weak, such that it doesn't cause any clinically significant disease, or they can actually disappear entirely from the population through these mutations. So yes, it will definitely come to an end. When, we don't know, but we'll continue to do what we're supposed to do to try and break the chains of transmission.
Yeah. So what we are going to do as well, Doc, today is that this is my opportunity. I always get hurt when we go to the doctor's room, and you can see the doctor is he talks, and then he stands up to try to signal you that you know what, your 5 minutes is done. Let's move on to the next one because we want to try to go through as many questions as possible. So I'll from time to time, no disrespect, but I'll just jump in to make sure that we keep attacking as I also see other questions coming in. Now, can you just quickly speak on the cold conditions, Doc? The weather.
Okay. All right. So we have said, okay, these viruses, all of them, most of the acute respiratory infection viruses, even the common flus that we talk about, even the previous coronaviruses, SARS, MERS, they tend to thrive in cold conditions, which means for most countries it would be the winter where you get an upsurge of cases. But with COVID-19 so far, even in other countries where it's quite hot and they are in summer, they've also been experiencing this. So it will obviously take us a bit of time to establish the true nature in terms of weather conditions. But wet conditions are also quite conducive. So it's not only cold, also wet conditions, humid conditions, they can actually be conducive for the spread of this and for the continued multiplication. But obviously, like we said, this goes hand in hand or hand in glove with continued human movements and exposure to each other. So this is why we need to try and follow all these protocols that we're talking about to limit our contact or our being in touch with each other, just to try and make sure we contain the virus.
Great. Thank you, Doc. The next one that we have is, should we be concerned about the conspiracy theories? Because it's one thing, and how do we identify what are conspiracy theories and not? Because Pip Valley is asking this question to say, there's so many theories. They want to inject 666. They want to kill people in Africa. In the earlier days, there was a video apparently in France or somewhere where people were talking about go and test this in Africa, and then once you see, should we be concerned about this, Doc, or this is just hogwash?
All right. Again, that's an interesting question, and I think these are the what questions for the days. Okay. It starts from people questioning the origins of COVID-19, which are not as yet clear to so many. It goes on to the issues of biological warfare that we continue to talk about. Does biological warfare exist or not? We definitely know that it does exist from history. There is the issue of anthrax and so many other agents that have potentially been used in biological warfare. So was the COVID-19 virus manufactured in the lab as a biological agent? Again, so all these questions will continue coming. But what we know, like I said, is this is a zoonotic virus, and it wasn't manufactured in the lab as far as we know. And were they trying to depopulate Africa or not? If they were trying to depopulate Africa by introducing corona, for me, the question that would then come to my mind immediately is, why then was this not inoculated in Nigeria, where you have 1 billion people? Why was this not inoculated in South Africa, which is the center for trade in Africa, and it's got 60 million people or more now? Why was it not inoculated in any part of Africa? Because it would have been very easy to say, okay, let's go and just inoculate this in Africa instead of China and start it there in Africa, and then maybe, ban travel from Africa to any parts of the world, then let Africa deal with this. So definitely in terms of this, I don't see how the conspiracy that it was meant to depopulate Africa would make sense, because it actually started in China and it actually spread to America, Asia, Europe, the UK first before it came to Africa, and it wreaked havoc in Italy, it wreaked havoc in Spain. Tens of thousands of people were killed. Spain was recording massive deaths when this pandemic was at its peak in Spain, and the same was happening in Italy, and none of those in Africa. And did they want to use Africans as guinea pigs? Because, the video was circulated, which was very wrong. And I think the scientists were actually eventually fired for spreading a wrong message. And as Africa, we actually said at that point in time, it was not sensible to actually do a vaccine test in Africa at that point, because Africa was not the highest burden setting, because for you to have sufficient numbers to test for the vaccine, you actually needed to go where the virus was, infecting people in huge numbers. So you find that these vaccine trials were then conducted in America, in the UK, in Asia, and in other parts of the world that were recording huge numbers of cases. And in Africa, South Africa is also one of the countries that was involved in these vaccine trials, because it was reporting huge numbers of cases, because it always makes sense to conduct them where you have those huge numbers of cases, so that you can attain a sufficient sample size for you to make sense of your studies. So the vaccines are definitely not meant to cause any harm to the population. Like I highlighted before, vaccines have been one of the greatest public health intervention in terms of reducing the complications, the morbidity, and yes.
Yeah, Doc, that I just want to put a comma there. I just want you to give us a bit of a list of diseases that were handled through vaccines, the likes of polio and so on. Just to bring that to light as well.
Yeah, so we had smallpox, which has been eradicated, and now you cannot hear of a case of smallpox. We have polio itself, which has almost been eradicated, and most countries have not reported any cases of acute flaccid paralysis in the past 10 or 15 years. We had measles, which was really wreaking havoc and killing many of our children before. We had diphtheria, we had whooping cough or pertussis. They have all been dealt with through vaccination. We have tuberculosis. We have all received BCG as part of the immunization program in most of our countries. And so children are no longer dying that much from TB in their numbers. And now we have even gone on to vaccinate against, cancers that are caused by infectious diseases. So talk about cervical cancer for women, talk about anal cancer for men, which are caused by a virus called human papilloma virus. We have introduced the vaccines for these cancers, and we are seeing markedly reduced numbers of people who present with disease that will progress to cervical cancer. So vaccination has really been very useful. In other parts of the world, they are vaccinating for hepatitis B, they are vaccinating for viral hemorrhagic diseases like dengue. If you have a history of travel from West Africa before you go.
Yeah. So I think we have left. I think we lost Doc a bit there. We are aware that Doc's network is a bit.
You have to provide evidence that you've been vaccinated against. Yeah.
Okay. So just a recap to those who just joined us. We are having a live Q&A with Dr. Grant Murewanhema, regarding COVID-19, and Doc is going to try as much as possible to go through as much questions as possible. We are aware that his network connection is a bit unstable, but if it happens that he drops off, he will definitely jump back on. He has really specifically set this time aside, so let's just be patient in terms of that, Doc. I see you are back with us. The next question, Doc, is it an airborne disease? Because this has been a concern. If I go into a lift or an elevator where someone was in there, or a room someone was there who had COVID-19, is this airborne? Should I be worried?
So yes, it's been a very contentious question that has caused lots of fights between international organizations, people saying the WHO misled us, the CDC misled us, and so on and so on. So yes, primarily we have said droplet spread. When your droplets go onto surfaces, that's when you're likely to drop this virus, and somebody then gets in touch with these contaminated surfaces and they get infection. But definitely the evidence that it's also airborne is now very clear. So yes, it's droplet spread, it's also airborne, but that does not mean that everywhere where you go, you're going to be breathing particles of COVID-19. It's a dense virus, which means it quickly settles on surfaces. So if somebody was infected is breathing into the air, it doesn't take long for the virus to actually settle on surfaces. And so, yes, it can be considered airborne, but primarily it's droplet spread and, contact with contaminated surfaces. That's responsible for the majority of transmissions.
Okay. Doc, last time you spoke about what others call kunatira in Shona, which is a process of steaming where you boil some water and you might put some herbs and things like that. You cover your head to open up your nostrils or your airways. There's been talk about some people saying it can kill the virus inside. You spoke about this, but there was a lot of follow-up questions that we received. So I see Vimbai here just asked the same question again to say, Doc, recap us. What are the safe limits here? Of course, Doc has answered this question before, so we'll try to make it so that he just answers it shortly so that we can jump on to the next question. But quickly, safe limits.
All right, thank you. So like I highlighted, I'll just recap that we have nothing against people who want to steam, as long as they know that, number one, it's not a treatment for COVID-19. Number two, it doesn't cure the virus. It's just to decongest and relieve the airways, of which if you have other things that you can use to do that, then that's better. The problem we have noticed with steaming is people sometimes use excessively high temperatures, and then they go on to damage their airways, causing what we call inhalational burns, which may not be apparent at that point in time, but can actually become evident in the future as you become prone to respiratory tract infections and other problems because you bent your airway. Also, when you inhale chemicals, be sure of what you are inhaling, because some of the chemicals that people are using in the herbs can actually also just be harmful to the airways, and then they can put them at risk of recurrent respiratory tract infections and other problems. So make sure that you are not using excessively high temperatures when you are doing this steaming. Don't do it for prolonged periods of time if you're doing it, and never use it as a substitute for medical treatment, because it's not. Medical treatment is still what we recommend and recognize for the treatment of symptoms. Of course, these adjuncts you can also do, but you have to know that they do have their limits.
Great. Whilst we are on that same question, Doc, we just want to clarify this. I just want you to break it down slightly. If we take a virus, let me say I'm holding the virus. We know it's very small, right? And let's say I put it here on my nose. Then I go where there's hot steam. Will the hot steam kill that virus sitting here?
That's an interesting question, and a question to which I would say I don't have an answer. Okay. The answer that I can give you with certainty, is that steaming does not kill the virus once you're infected with the virus. That I can answer you with certainty, that once the virus is in your cells, steaming is not going to do anything to it. Whether it's going to kill the virus on surfaces or not, that's something that I can't answer with certainty now, but maybe something that we would have to look at going forward.
Okay, great.
Part of what we have to do is,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was saying part of what we have to do is we have to give the correct information, and that information must have been verified, scientifically. So some of the questions, because nobody has looked at these things, we're not able to answer them.
Yeah, I think from my side, Doc, the most important part that I've understood from you on this steaming issue, even from the previous broadcast, was that it's generally not safe. You have to be cautious of what you are doing. Don't just do it for the sake of doing it.
Absolutely.
And I think because a
Yes.
lot of us won't be able to measure the temperature, just make sure that it's not so hot. I spoke to someone afterwards, someone called me and said, me, when I do it so that I can feel the steam going down until I can feel it when it's in my tummy, to show that I use as hot as possible the heat. So, and,
Yeah.
and, and that's what I think where you're coming from, to say, if you're doing this, okay, but watch out. You need to control the temperature. If you are using some chemicals or some herbs, you need to be careful what you're using. This is a quick one, Doc. I think you spoke a bit about it. Was it created? The answer was, we cannot say. But what we know, whether it was a lab project or not, but what we know is it started in China, and it's suspected that it was from interaction of humans and animals and eating animals and things like that. But you cannot say for certain. Am I summarizing it correctly?
Absolutely right. 100% correct.
Great. Now, here's a comment, which is a half comment, half question, but the Chinese have dealt with it. And this is a question that other people have asked so much. Now, it brings in also the question of saying, are the Chinese lying or not? Where people are saying, it started in China. You've got so many people in China, but the people that dealt with it in China are so few. Secondly, based on what is being reported, it seems like it's under control now in China. What is going on? Do you have any update and that can confirm this as fact or not?
So, I mean, again, this is a question where we have to give official information. And yes, the official information is that it's by and large under control in China, even though they are still reporting cases. But why was China able to deal with it so rapidly? China was very aggressive. That's one of the things that you have to realize, that when China started dealing with this pandemic, they were aggressive. They left nothing to chances. You could see the way they just banned travel, they closed their borders, the way they just, sealed Wuhan from the rest of China. You can see the way they went on about disinfecting their surfaces, closing colleges and making sure that there was proper isolation, there was proper contact, there was proper, restriction of international travel. So China was really very aggressive, which is an element that lagged in most parts of the world. If you look at some countries like Sweden, for example, they took a lackadaisical approach to this. If you look at the way the United States of America dealt with this, the relaxed approach to this, by and large, countries in some other parts of the world considered human rights to a large extent, and they did not impose as strict regulations as China did. And I think this is one of the differences that China had with the rest of the world. They were really, really aggressive. But one of the things that you can also not be certain of is whether China is telling us the correct information or not when it comes to whether it's under control. Some countries have been under-reporting. Some countries have been under-testing. Some countries have been concealing figures. So you can never be sure as long as you're not there. There is a suspicion that even China grossly underreported the number of people who died from the disease in the initial wave. We have no clear evidence as to what actually happened so far. But what we definitely know is that they were very aggressive in terms of their public health interventions, and they left nothing to chance.
Yeah. And Doc, I think there is this comment here from Tatenda Mtingwa, who also asked earlier on about being airborne. And I think this is something that I think is a difficult thing, where he's saying, it seems there are some people who are experiencing symptoms, but they were never in physical contact with any infected person. The difficultness of this question or this comment is the one of saying, how do you know that you were never in contact with an infected person? But I think it makes sense as well now to look at it, and I'm just recapping what you said earlier, that yes, you might not have been in contact with an infected person, but maybe you touched a surface that had, droplets that had come from an infected person before you. This now leads me to ask this question, Doc. how long does the virus survive on a surface? Different surfaces, be it steel, wood, and things like that. Do we know? Do we have clearer answers to this?
Okay, that's fine. So two answers. Okay, number one, stages of transmission for the virus. Okay, the first time we were talking about imported disease, and so this history of contact and travel was critically important. Later on, we moved through different stages to what we now call community transmission. Community transmission basically means that you have a virus that's in circulating all over your communities, and anybody you come across is a potentially infected person, whether they are exhibiting symptoms or not, whether it's in a supermarket or whether you are in any other place where there are people. There is a potential that there is somebody who is infected, but who doesn't know it.
So we seem to be, Doc's network seems to be acting up. Like I said earlier, that his network might act up, but if it does, we'll definitely make sure that we get him back on. And he has prepared, we have prepared partly for this. We've prepared partly for this to happen. Doc, are you back with me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm back. So, yes, I was talking about community transmission. So, let's beware that there is COVID-19. If you're talking about Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe is 10 provinces. Each province is a district. What I can confirm to you guys is every province in Zimbabwe has reported cases, and every district in each of those provinces has reported cases, which means there are cases even in those villages where your parents come from, even though they may not have been tested. Now, coming to surfaces, yes, the evidence is there that the virus survives on surfaces for different periods of time, which range from a few hours for some surfaces to some days for some surfaces. I could have done that breakdown and brought it for you if I had known in advance that I would be asking this question. But it suffices to say on some surfaces like your wooden surfaces, your metal surfaces, and plastics, this virus can actually stay there for even up to 3 days, 4 days for some, from what's been studied. So you can actually get into contact with infected surfaces that were infected a day prior. You can get it from your supermarket when people are just touching the things that you're buying and leaving them and going and so on. So it's a virus that's really everywhere now. So, yes.
I must say that though, Doc, that answer leaves me very worried. If it's suspected that it can live up to 3 days on a surface, come on, it effectively then means that it almost says that we are doomed. But let's move on with the questions. Abby here asks to say, can you please advise on the issue of seeking urgent medical assistance if you get chest pains in this pandemic? Now, I want to couple it with other questions as well that have been asked. So she's talking about the chest pains. There are some people who have also sent questions where they were talking about back pain. There are people who have sent messages talking about headache, which are areas where generally when people start talking about symptoms, they are not always spoken about, especially the chest pains, the back pain, and so why is it advised that you need to urgently seek medical attention if you start having such symptoms? And Abigail here asks specifically about chest pains.
So let's talk about chest pain and then about other symptoms. So chest pain usually signifies that you have significant pneumonia or pneumonitis that's actually going on. Remember, we say this is a virus that attacks the substance of your lungs. And in the initial phases, if you remember from last week, I said a lot of people are actually moving around communities with very low levels of oxygen in their blood, something that we call silent hypoxia or happy hypoxia. Now, when you get to the extent of experiencing chest pain or shortness of breath, usually it means that you have significant disease, you are in need of supplemental oxygen, you are in need of other interventions to assist you with your breathing. So you need to have a doctor check on your oxygen saturation levels, or your nurse, and advise you in terms of whether you need supplemental oxygen, and whether you should have this oxygen at home, whether you should have it in hospital, whether you need to be hospitalized in an ICU, or whether you actually don't need it. So the whole point of getting assessment by a medical practitioner, a doctor, a nurse, or whoever kind of practitioner you have, is to assess the severity or extent of your disease, to say, okay, we think this is mild disease, you can handle this at home, here is your pack to go with at home, here is your paracetamol, here is your Soflex or Soflin for your cough, and so on and so on. It's to say, okay, this is moderate disease, maybe you need closer follow-up, let's put you in a hospital, but we are not going to put you in oxygen, or to say, okay, this is severe disease, I think we need to put you up in a hospital and put you on oxygen, or to say this is critical disease, maybe you actually need to put you in an ICU and put a tube down in your throat to assist you with breathing. So assessment of your symptoms is very important to determine the severity of your disease. That's number one. Number two, it also helps to say, okay, this patient or this person has COVID, but is it the one that's causing this symptoms? Sometimes, like I said, in our setting, we have plenty of other diseases. Okay, we have malaria, we have typhoid, we have so on, that could cause fever, that could cause headache, that could cause any of those symptoms. So medical assessment also helps you to say, is there anything else that you can potentially treat that might be missed by a person just being at home, so that you get appropriate treatment.
Okay.
And in terms of symptoms, remember, COVID is so weird in the sense that it can cause any kind of symptom. We have not finished listing the symptoms. We are discovering new symptoms every day, and we are finding that it can cause symptoms on the skin, on the tongue, on your toes. So the list will continue to go on for as long as it exists. So any symptom really is assessment.
And Doc, that is where now people start having the worries, right, about the vaccine, where you're saying we're still listing down the symptoms, we are still studying this virus, but at the same time we're saying we already now have a vaccine, and that's where people now start saying, why so much speed of this vaccine? We got this vaccine, we've always been told it takes minimum 18 months to get a vaccine. Now, very quickly we have it, but at the same time, we're already saying we have a mutant, we have a new one, we have a different one, and things like that. Now, I want to go to the question that is coming from Prince here. Prince is saying, has the mRNA technology been used before Corona in vaccines? I know Dr. Rasala Navo touched on RNA vaccines a bit, because some people were saying or concerned that this RNA vaccine affects your DNA and blah, 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 and things like that, right? Now, he's asking this question, has this technology been used before? But also, you can couple it with that question of saying, we're still learning the disease, but we're already saying we have a vaccine for it. Is this vaccine to be trusted in terms of it being able to stop the disease, which you have said, we can kind of trust it, but possible after effects later on down the line? Doc.
All right. So I think let's start by addressing a number of things here. And, let's just give very simple analogies in terms of how technology is advanced. Think about when Apple started making the first iPhone, when Steve Jobs did that prototype, to what we have now, the iPhone 12, and think about the differences in terms of speed, transmission, communication, and the same applies to travel as well. Think about how much time it used to take to go to the USA from Zimbabwe and how much it takes now. Technology is evolving. It's changing very fast in terms of all aspects of science. And even though I'm not a vaccinologist or somebody who studies vaccines, I'm an epidemiologist, but what I can say is science has really revolutionized in terms of, drug development, the pharmaceutical industry, and the messenger RNA technology that was used by Pfizer. I think it's also the same that was used by the is it the AstraZeneca? Because these vaccines, they are different vaccines, and they are all using different technologies. Others use adenovirus as a carrier. Others are using whole cell killed vaccines and so on. But Pfizer and Zeneca are using messenger RNA technology. It's been tried and it's been an ongoing process. When the COVID-19 pandemic came, it obviously gave a chance to science because of the huge numbers. We are talking about 100 million infections now in a space of 1 year, and we are talking about 2 million deaths in a space of 1 year, which is also very phenomenal in terms of numbers of people infected over such a period of time. If you go to history, you may not find other diseases that have infected such a huge number of the population in a limited period of time. So what these huge numbers of infections do also is they give you the numbers that you need to quickly study these over a short period of time. The question is, should we wait to develop a vaccine for 10 years, 15 years, if more people are continuing to be infected and we continue to lose more people? To me, the answer is no. We know this vaccine technology has been tried. We have experience from previous trials. It might not have been successful, but we learned valuable lessons. And in terms of testing for whether it's actually safe, we know that it's very safe. Messenger RNA does not in any way interact with the DNA that determines who you are. It just teaches your body in a way to respond to this infection when you get this infection by giving instruction to your body to actually produce um, proteins that cover the surface of the virus, which we are really targeting for. When you look at the evolution of vaccines, I think one would want to say the vaccines that we are getting to now are probably much safer than the vaccines that were used several years ago. Because remember, in the past, we used to use even live attenuated viruses. So live attenuated virus would mean that you are taking a virus, you are weakening it, and you are introducing it into somebody. And those with weaker immune systems could actually get disease from this. So the vaccines that we have now actually are designed by and large to target the particles on the virus which are responsible for causing damage and not the whole virus. So they are much safer vaccines. Obviously, I think studying these vaccines is a continuous process. We will continue to get more information on their safety as time goes on. The COVID-19 has been around for just about a year, so we cannot talk about long-term safety because this virus has not been around for 10 years or for 15 years. So what can happen after 15 years, we'll only know after 15 years. But the question is, can we sacrifice people now because of fears of what might happen 20 years later?
Yeah. Doc, there is this question, the masks. So there's all sorts of masks, but this question from Tatenda is speaking directly about these cloth masks. Cotton or whatever form of material that we're using. We know we've got the surgical masks, right? But on these cloth masks, are they not going to also affect us in the long run? Or maybe in general, is it advisable to use all these cloth masks? Because we understand, of course, we want to try as much as possible to reduce the transfer of droplets from one person to the other. But what do you say about this? And is there any special type of material that you say maybe rather use this or maybe rather use it this way?
It's an interesting question about masks. And if you remember, if you actually go back to history again, 1918, 1919 Spanish flu, if you read about it, people had to wear masks everywhere they were going, even to football stadiums. I don't think long-term follow-up revealed any damage from the use of masks per se. And just from a reasoning point of view, when you look at face masks, they are just a filter, okay, a filter, and we've used filters for different things. So they basically just allowing air to get through your nostrils and into your airways, but they are not doing any harm apart from that. The only worrisome thing that I would think about is whether they are actually safe enough or not. And as you know, science has told us that, cloth masks are not the safest or the most efficacious in terms of, preventing acquisition of COVID-19. If you're really working in a risky area or if you're going into a risky area, then the surgical mask, the medical mask is the better mask to actually be putting on. But however, we know that the general population cannot afford or don't necessarily need the surgical mask or the respirator mask, the N95, for their ordinary day-to-day activities. What they need is a mask that's got at least 3 layers of cloth. That's what's recommended by the WHO and other organizations, and a mask that they wash regularly and dry it in the sun, iron it, allow it to dry. It should do the job. But in terms of long-term harmful effects, I don't think there are any. And so far, there were no reports from previous instances when people had to use masks for a very long period of time. I'm a surgeon. I spend a lot of time in theater. So obviously, for the past many years, I've always been putting on different kinds of masks, and I haven't suffered, and we haven't yet reports of damage from these masks. So I think for now, yeah, let's do it to protect ourselves.
We should continue with using them. So what we're going to do is we just want to give Doc a chance to just at least take a glass of water. So we're just going to take a minute a break, just hearing a message that came from one of us, Tandiwe, talking about COVID-19 and what we need to do. Let's just have a listen. Doc, you can drink. You can take a glass of water. When we come back, Doc, we want to continue on the masks, but about children. The issue that it is advised that children very young should not take masks. Why is it so? If parents are concerned, what should they do? And there's a question that was presented earlier about sending kids back to school. Should kids really be going back to school in these circumstances? So let's have a listen and then we'll continue.
Hi guys, it's Tandiwe again. Thank you for following Baobab Chats. And you know what guys, I've been thinking a lot about the stigma that goes around health issues in our society. Like today, there is so much stigma and discrimination when it comes to HIV. This has been going on for a long time. But when it comes to coronavirus, guys, I want to urge us to be open and to discuss these things with our family, with our friends. Because if we keep it secret, we don't know the next person that you're infecting, and there is no discrimination to this disease. It's things that we cannot control. So don't be shy about it. Don't feel free to and be open to talk about coronavirus. Feel free to talk about it with your friends. Feel free to talk about with your families and the health providers. I know so many governments have developed health facilities and health applications so that you can get advice, and don't listen to conspiracy theories. Stick to facts. If you don't know, rather Google and cross-check the information that you're receiving. And I just wanted to encourage you guys not to hide behind your closed doors and to feel free about it. If you have COVID, disclose it to your family, to your friends, so that they know how to keep themselves safe. No one is going to discriminate against you. You are not the one who started with this disease, and you're not going to be the one who ends it, but you can end the chain that continues within you. So let's be safe and let's keep it safe, guys. Thank you for following Baobab Chats and keep subscribing. Thank you.
So, Doc, we are back. Tandiwe speaks about stigma, which is something that we will talk about, Doc, as when you come to the end, because there's really an issue about stigma when it comes to COVID-19, where the moment people know that you have had COVID-19 before, some people now don't want to associate with you. People are scared that, you are going to pass it to them. At the same time, there's this thing of, oh, these are the people that are moving around spreading this COVID-19. Why were you mixing and mingling with people and you knew you were going to get the disease? And there's the issue of saying if someone is known, then people are saying, no, you have got a weak immune system, you are not strong, and things like that. So that's something that we want to touch on. But just to reset and recap to those who just joined us, we are having a live Q&A with Dr. Grant Murewanhema, a medical doctor based in Zimbabwe. He's helping us with unpacking this pandemic, unpacking the disease. Dr. Grant is actually an epidemiologist, which means he studied public health and dealing with epidemics. Doc, you can see that I skipped some classes at school. But anyway, let's talk about masks and children going back to school.
All right, thanks. So I think when it comes to children below 2, in particular, those ones, we don't want them to have masks on because the masks can actually do more harm to them than good in terms of their breathing and accessing their, oxygen. So whenever you have kids that young, it's advisable that you don't put on masks on them. When it comes to slightly older children, you can consider having them put on masks. When it comes to school-going children, it's a must that they must also be putting on masks as long as they are in public spaces and when they are in school and in other places, because they will be protective. Remember what we said about young kids is, COVID-19, particularly when it was in the first wave and even up to now, is very peculiar in the sense that if it infects children, it tends to cause asymptomatic disease, or if it does, it causes very mild disease. Reasons for that are still to be explored, but what asymptomatic people can do, or people with mild diseases, they can take the disease and then they spread it to other more vulnerable people in the community or at home, who could be grandmother, grandfather, or some elderly person, or somebody with diabetes, hypertension, or some other infection, or some other condition that makes their chances of dying high. So this is the reason why we say children must also be protected. The issue of school will remain a contentious issue because we know that kids are better off in school than at home. The question is, are we able to offer them enough in terms of protecting them from getting these diseases in schools? Are we also able to protect our teachers? Because it's about teachers and parents. And I think each country or its environment has to look at its own environment and see how much they are able to offer in terms of infection prevention and control at school, and then in terms of how much information, education, and communication can happen. But also, how much can we use the advances in modern technology? In other words, how far can we go with Zoom lectures, online lectures, WhatsApp lectures, and what can be done in the community to make data accessible and available to our kids so that even in this pandemic, when we have total lockdown, education can also continue. But what we know is sooner or later we will need to go to school, and we will need to have our teachers vaccinated because they will be high risk, and we need to have enough preparation in terms of infection prevention and control at these schools to make it worthwhile and safe for our children.
Thank you for that one, Doc. I think I would just want to group that with also the question that we have been asked earlier on by Lennon about the levels of now this is directed specifically because you are in Zimbabwe. He's just wanting to understand in Zimbabwe, in this situation, do people, because you mentioned that in every district, in every province, the disease has been reported. We have had cases, but the levels of awareness, can you take us into your confidence of, what are the levels of awareness and what can other people still be doing, and are people really aware and are they getting this level of information?
All right, so let me talk in terms of policy first. When you look at the response to COVID-19 in Zimbabwe at policy level, there is actually a pillar in government called risk communication and community engagement. And what these have done is to distribute a lot of awareness messages through different platforms, different media, radio, television, also social media such as WhatsApp, Twitter, YouTube, and all platforms that are available. And we have taken charts to rural areas at the shops, growth points, schools, boreholes, and so on. So we know that people are aware of the existence of COVID-19 everywhere in Zimbabwe. There is a very high level of awareness that this exists, but the question is in terms of risk perception, and I think this is where the problem always comes. Okay, because understanding that this exists and understanding that yourself you're actually at risk are two different things. And a survey was done by this risk communication and community engagement pillar and noted a very low level of risk perception in general in some parts of Zimbabwe, where people think that, you know, this disease exists, but it's confined to urban areas. Some people in the urban areas think, okay, this is for the affluent people because the people who are dying from this disease are high-profile people, they are ministers, because those are the ones they are hearing about. So this disease has got nothing to do with us. And of course, in the first wave, you would hear a lot of people saying, no, this is a European, American, and Asian disease. It's not an African disease. So awareness is there, but the problem is the risk perception, and that's what we need to intensify. We need to let everybody know that they are at risk of contracting this, and their risk is just the same as those people who are elsewhere, outside where they stay. And we need to continue hammering these messages. It's something that we can never get tired of. And this is why even when you come to our Facebook page, we run the biggest Facebook page in Zimbabwe, which is called the Coronavirus COVID-19 Zimbabwe. And you find that we continue hammering these messages every day. We want people to be saturated with knowledge and information about COVID-19. We want people to get to a stage where they say, we don't want to hear about this because we have heard so much, but more so we want actually people to start acting on prevention, because this is the missing link to all the efforts that we are putting in this.
Wow. And one of the important points to add to that, Doc, is the fact that you are here doing that work as well, in terms of, you know, making yourself available from your busy schedule. By the way, the reason why even Doc is wearing his coat is because he said he was at work and he's busy working, but he just had to squeeze in some time to come and deal with this. I just want to, you know, just to refresh the room again. You know, Doc, a lot of people, it's important to state this, a lot of people are really appreciating the work that you're doing by being here. I'm just flighting some of the comments that have been coming. You know, I can't go through all of them, but a lot of people are really appreciating you taking the time, you coming to our level so that we can really understand this, you know, and the fact that you are not dodging questions, you are responding to them directly in a way that instills confidence in us so that we can go out there and share with others. And with that being said, let's continue to share the link on our Facebook pages, in our WhatsApp, on YouTube, so that other people who might have questions can throw in their questions here as well. Now, this question has been responded to before, Doc. We have dealt with it before, but just reinfection. Is it possible or not? I know, please check also the previous broadcast that we did with Doc, the part 1. He responded to this question. But since we are here, Doc, I'll just ask you to just give a short answer to this one.
All right. So, yes, from what we know so far, yes, you can get reinfected. And that means even if you've had COVID-19, you still need to continue to be careful and practice all the infection prevention and control protocols that we talk about. You still need to wear your face mask, physical distance, wash your hands, and, you know, avoid unnecessary travel, because, yes, there are chances that you can get infected and you can reinfected for the 3rd time and so on. Obviously, as we continue following up the issue to do with immunity and how much the antibodies that are generated after a single episode stays in your body will be able to answer this question even better. And, this will also enable us to give proper advice with regards to whether somebody who has had this infection needs vaccination or not. But for now, the two answers to these questions, one which you asked and one which I created, is that yes, you can get reinfected. And for now, yes, people who have been infected before need to be vaccinated. Where the vaccines are available, they are not yet available in Zimbabwe.
Okay, great. Now, it's a comment, of course, that talks about about the high temperatures and the infection rates being low in Limpopo. Nana, this was kind of answered earlier about the issue of temperatures. But also one thing that I would like to say, Nana, when you get a chance, if you watch from 3 weeks ago, where we had Dr. Rasala Navo, who is based in Limpopo in Messina, a South African doctor, and she was speaking about in the first wave in Limpopo, cases were very low. And she was speaking about the fact that, but with the second wave, cases have really shot, firstly. Secondly, she was talking about in the first wave, we had a corner in a ward that was reserved for COVID-19 patients. But we now have had to convert a whole ward to now make it to be a COVID-19 ward. So effectively, in the second wave, the situation is worse than in the first wave. And with regard to the high temperatures, what Doc has said earlier was the fact that we cannot say for sure that high temperatures kill COVID-19 or reduce the spread of the disease. Now, Doc, there's an interesting point that was raised here about, so the approach of saying it's the best immune system win. Is it a proper medical analogy that we can use? Which we have kind of seen in some countries, if you look like what has happened in some countries, like in the US, because of so much politics that was attached to COVID-19 and things like that. You see that with the previous administration, it was more like it's a survival of the fittest, and with the way that their country is fragmented and things like that. Is this something that is also being discussed in the scientific world of saying, or in the medical field, after all is said and done, those with the best immune systems, they need to survive. We need our economies to run. People can't die of hunger.
So, the question is, how much are we prepared to sacrifice human life for? And I'm trained to save lives. I'm trained to make sure that people live. But I'm also trained to make sure that a substantial amount or a proportion of our population enjoys good health. Okay, Sweden tried this approach. They eventually, at some point in time, started paying the price. The US is recording 4,000 deaths almost on a daily basis, which is quite massive. We can get to herd immunity, but the question is, how many people do we need to lose before we actually get to that point? Herd immunity is something that you acquire when at least maybe 70 to 80% of the population for some diseases has been exposed and acquired immunity. And if you let this all, go on naturally, it might be some years before you actually get there. But in the process, you would have lost a lot of people. When you introduce vaccines, you speed up the process of getting herd immunity and get to protect a substantial amount of the population in a short period of time. And that's what public health aims to do, because we aim to prolong life, we aim to improve life, and we aim to make life better. So for us, we don't sacrifice people for saying make the strongest immune system win. No, that's not our strategy.
But whilst you're there, Doc, I want to at least pin you a bit on this one. But this, we know, happens in the medical field, where, especially with specialist equipment like ventilators, we know that from time to time, the reason why even we had this shortage of ventilators in this case with COVID-19 is because we always have so few ventilators in hospitals, such that you doctors from time to time are forced to choose between a rich and a poor person, or an older person and a younger person, a person who still has 60 years to live and a person who maybe have 5 years to live, to decide who gets, a ventilator or some of this specialist equipment. It's a reality that is there in the field.
Well, I'm glad. Normally, I don't have to make such decisions, because if I'm not in public health, then I'm in maternity and making sure that pregnant women, deliver safely. So I'm never in a position to be confronted with such. Health economics, of course, also looks at that. It looks at efficiency and says, if you are cornered in a situation, what do we do? Who do we sacrifice? It's not a position anyone would want to be put on at some point in time. So
Okay.
I'll evade answering that, but I'll just say what I'm trained to do is to make sure that we try to prolong life and, make people live as healthily as possible. And, that's the role of public health.
Yeah. Question from our own page. Once vaccinated, can you still be infected?
Yeah, of course. If you look at what we know so far in terms of these vaccines, if you look at people who have received flu vaccines and have received several H1N1 and so on, you constantly need to be vaccinated to boost your immune system. We are not sure, apart from the 2 doses to 3 doses that we're talking of so far for SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, how many more you will need in the future as booster doses. But yes, we need to say, you can still get the infection if you're vaccinated. One of the things that vaccines do is they reduce complications, okay? They reduce your chances of developing severe disease, or they reduce your chances of dying. And that's one big advantage of vaccines. Even if they don't prevent the infection, they'll probably make your disease very mild. And for some people, it will be like they never actually got the disease, even though they got infected. So we need vaccines.
Okay. Great, Doc. Shalom here is asking to say, so there's this issue about 10 days isolation, right? Of course, in the early days, we were told about the 14 days. Nowadays, there's a lot of talk in many different countries about 10 days of isolation. How long does it take, on average, or if we have a specific answer, for a person to fully recover from COVID-19? Number one. Number two, when a person gets infected, how long are they, what's the medical term, where they can still pass on the disease? Can they still pass on the disease as long as they're still sick, or we have a duration in which they are no longer infectious to other people?
All right, so there are actually more than 10 questions in what you've just asked. That's too many questions. There's the issue of recovery. There's the issue of 10-day isolation. There's the issue of after how long can one be considered recovered. Now, let me just start by saying the 10-day isolation period, we have to be clear. This is a period for asymptomatic people, okay? This is a period for people who have been tested, okay? You were just moving around, but you are a contact of somebody who had COVID-19, or you were tested for travel purposes, and then you were found to be COVID-19 positive, and you don't develop any cough or any other symptom. This is the kind of person who the 10-day isolation period refers to, because the assumption is by the end of this 10-day period, you have cleared the virus from your body and you are no longer infectious. If you have symptoms, you need to wait until resolution of your symptoms, and then there will be more days after resolution of your symptoms for us to say we can safely de-isolate you. How long does it take for people to recover? This is a very variable sort of question, because our bodies will handle these infections differently. Some people will recover in a few days, as early as 3 to 5 days. Some people will go up for 21 days. And of course, some people would then have long-term complications from the infection, even though they will have cleared the infection. Okay, so the answer to how long does it take for you to recover is really variable, and is a function of how strong your immune system is. Do you have any other chronic illnesses or comorbidities that are making this disease worse in you? And do you develop any complications from the disease? So that's by a case to case basis. And how long do you remain infectious? I think we have also answered this by saying, okay, if you're asymptomatic, we say after 10 days, we are no longer considering you infectious. If you have had symptoms, then you have to wait for 3 more days after all your symptoms have resolved, and then we can say you're probably no longer infectious. But these questions, the answers to these are not written in black and white. It's really variable, but at policy level, or to be able to function, that's what we have.
Wow. Great, Doc. Now, Tatenda is asking now specifically because you're in Zim, and he's saying in South Africa, we're talking about a second wave. In Zimbabwe, what is the difference between waves? Is it just a matter of first set of people got sick and then it seemed like it was getting better, then people get sick again, or there's a technical difference between these waves? First question. Why I'm expanding his question this way is because he goes on to say, in which wave are we dealing with in Zimbabwe? So that speaks to the question of what exactly is a wave, because we just hear these things. Second wave, now we hear there's a variant, now there's a South African variant, and there's so much travel restrictions in many countries in the world against South Africa because of this variant. Then we hear of an Indian variant, UK variant. Can we break this down, Doc?
All right, so I mean, this is very simple. Saying wave is just an issue of semantics or words, Like you rightly said, we all had a time when we had our initial reported number of cases, and then they go to a peak, and then they start coming down and sort of stabilize. Okay, so we just call that a wave as it is. Nothing technical. When you get again another spike of cases, then we call that a wave, and so on and so on. That's why we hear people saying we had the first wave in Zimbabwe, and then we stabilized, and then around December, January, we started having a second wave where the cases started coming up again. And at the moment, it seems to be stabilizing, but we keep watching, and people anticipate that as we go towards winter again, which is soon, we might have another third wave. So these waves just have to do when you start getting an increase in the number of infections again, and then they get to a peak and start falling down. Then in terms of these variants or strains, like we said, this coronavirus is actually prone to mutations, and the mutation is just a change in some of the components of the virus, which happens when it's multiplying. So we will continue to get this. Like I explained earlier, we expect that these mutations could actually bring for us weaker viruses, which is something that we always hope for. Technically calling it the South African variant, the Indian variant, and so on, to me is wrong, but it's it's adopted terminology elsewhere, which people use to then just try and say, for us to control and remain with the mutations that we have in this country, let's try and block people from the other country from coming with mutations from their country to this country. So far in Zimbabwe, we have not sequenced, which means we have not characterized the virus that we have currently. We did characterize in the first wave, and we know what we were dealing with, but so far we don't know with certainty whether we're dealing with the imported strain from South Africa, but chances are highly likely because South Africa is the country that we share borders with, and we have the highest movement of people from South Africa. So there are high chances that that variant from South Africa is the same one that we're dealing with. And there are always chances that when South Africa gets a variant, because of our spatial relationship and our economic relationship, we'll always also get those variants into Zimbabwe, yes.
Yeah. Doc, we cannot thank you enough for the time. We are running out of time. We have to close at some point. We also need to release you so that you can go and do, the precious work that you do every day, serving lives. Before we do that, Doc, there's a talks about people with underlying conditions. Now, these underlying conditions, at times we don't fully understand it. right? I know you cannot give us maybe an exhaustive list, but can you just give us some specific situations that are regarded as underlying conditions? That if you have these specific conditions, be it if you're obese or overweight, or if you have this kind of disease but high blood pressures, you have to classify yourself as having an underlying condition. Number one. Number two, general lifestyle issues people might have. Like there are people who can't sleep covering their head at night, for example. They say that I can't breathe, right? Or people who generally, at times, if they run, they say I'm running out of breath and things like that. Can you just give us, in as short as possible, specific kinds of people that really, really have to be very cautious?
Okay, so I'll say number one, everybody needs to be very cautious, okay, because we are seeing new things. But in terms of underlying conditions, if you've got any other diagnosis that you have, any disease that you have, you are a high-risk patient. But more so, in particular, we have to point that people who are diabetic, that you've got diabetes mellitus, either type 1 or type 2, or any other form of diabetes, people who suffer from high blood pressure, which we call hypertension, people with asthma, people with obesity. Obesity is like when your body mass index is greater than 30, and I think people know about this BMI. So people with high BMIs and people with immunosuppression who might be on anti-cancer drugs, people with cancer, people living with other chronic conditions that can suppress their immune system. These people are particularly high-risk people. Okay, and then also remembering lifestyles like smoking. If you are somebody who smokes, it also puts you at additional risk of, developing severe disease and suffering serious complications. One of the most important things to do is, if you have any one of these chronic conditions that you're living with, be in constant touch with your general practitioner, your medical practitioner, so that you have optimal control of this disease, and your medications are reviewed regularly so that your disease is well controlled, because that increases your chances of faring better against this COVID-19. Your lifestyle in general, you need to adjust it, to reduce your weight, to improve your physical fitness. Adjust your diet, eat well, eat nutritious food, highly rich in vitamins and minerals, because these things improve your ability to withstand infections, including COVID-19 and other infections. So your lifestyle, or our lifestyle, has to change. And we have to move from the sedentary lifestyle where we just sit in a chair and spend the day on a laptop or a chair all the time. And we have to start walking, running, jogging, or whatever we can do within the context of this lockdown that we're currently in. And then we can improve that as the lockdowns are lifted.
Wow. Thank you so much. So as we close, we just want to share a message about Doc has been sharing here based on his knowledge, his training, his experience, but we also have our own experience based on how we are living the disease. So we just want to encourage each other to share our experiences. Let's just take a listen. I would really love to encourage those who have gone through and got sick and recovered from COVID-19 to really share their stories, to share it openly so that it can help some of us. There is still a huge percentage of us that are in denial of the disease, and I think you would have done society at large a good service by sharing your experience, sharing what you went through, how you dealt with it, as well as the pains that you went through, so that we can be able to serve one person. If your testimony or your experience can serve one soul, that's one soul more than enough. So we can try and make use of the experiences that we've had and harness on those experiences. And you realize that for a lot of us would relate more to a situation when we hear it based on a person that is close to us that have gone through the same experience. So I think would like to encourage others that have gone through this experience, if possible, to really find it. One of the early days of COVID-19 last year, there's a lady who wrote a long blog about her experiences, and I can attest to that. I learned quite a lot from that. And that was really, I think that was around April, May last year. And that was in the early days. But from that, we became a bit more conscious and a bit more cautious of our actions. That experience on its own, that was shared by that person, helped me to realize the reality that was.
Understanding that in the current times that we are, where we are faced with the challenge of COVID, there are different propositions in terms of what should be done. I think what I am worried about is people who are in rural communities who are not connected to the internet. Those individuals do not have access to updates about what's happening. They do not have access to updates in terms of what they can actually do. So if someone is willing to do, an act of kindness, my suggestion would be, please support individuals in rural communities by providing, it could be just top up airtime, top up data, providing them with, cheap smartphones that they can use to access the internet. I understand that some challenges are beyond our capabilities because they need the involvement of either the government or mobile network operators. But I would urge individuals who can to support those in rural communities to also get online so that they don't remain behind forever.
Thank you, Doc, or just sharing some of the messages that we have had. Last words from you, Doc? Last words for the show? Firstly, there's been so much people thanking you. And let's keep sharing the links. Doc, I'll allow you to close the show and close this conversation.
Right. Thank you so much, Sten, and thank you for the opportunity. What we are doing is we're trying to share as much information as possible, and this is all voluntary because we are hoping for the best for our population. I think what I would need to remind people is we continue looking for solutions with regards to treatment and prevention, but in the meanwhile, let's continue to mask up, let's continue to practice physical distancing, let's continue to wash our hands frequently with liquid soap under running water for at least 20 seconds, or sanitizing with at least 70% alcohol solutions, and let's stay home if we don't need to go out. We're going to defeat this, but obviously it takes concerted efforts from ourselves as individuals, the communities, the public health sector, civic organizations, the government, international partners, and everybody. It has to be concerted efforts, and we'll definitely get through this. And of course, let's remain hopeful, and let's show each other support, love, faith, and hope in these difficult times. Let's not stigmatize people who contract COVID-19 because it's not because they want to, but it's because they were just unfortunate and they were in the path of the virus and got infected. So they need our support and love to get through this. Thank you, and God bless you. I'm sure we'll meet again next time.
Thank you, and it's bye-bye for now.
Bye.